Altman seems to be a man in a hurry. For those of you who follow city-states, I like the Singapore story, amazing exponential growth over time. But Altman seems to want to build Dubai. All of that, but more golden, more tomorrow, not next quarter. Or come to think of it, actually, Zubin, it feels more like Riyadh these days.
Funny but true. Well, Aman, it's a classic David and Goliath story, and Altman wants to do both, right? Like a David that takes on a Goliath, maybe two, maybe three, to make room to become an even bigger new Goliath. And, we talked about revenue, but let's talk about the personality crashes. They're also getting pretty heated. You have Altman, very public disagreement with Musk and his more recent missionaries versus mercenaries jab at Zuckerberg. I think it's a calculated move to reframe OpenAI as the moral, the legitimate leader in the AGI space. It's a true power play right off the Machiavellian's playbook of the great houses.
So here's the rub. I think it's going to take some maneuvering that would make Machiavelli, your favorite guy, blush. Altman needs to attack two of what are three palaces of profitability, and he is doing that. The first is the attention economy, grabbing users from Google and Meta, maybe even LinkedIn, and definitely X, just for shits and giggles. The second is the ecosystem economy. The series of announcements we talked about just a moment ago goes after just that. Here, he needs to thread the needle and be careful not to invoke the wrath of Apple and Microsoft, for now at least. If he grabs material market share of both the ecosystem and attention economy, he will have plenty of riches to capture the imagination of customers, satisfy his growing troops, and quell the inevitable fears of Wall Street.
Aman, we talked about three palaces of profitability. You only shared two. What's that third one in that trilogy? The one that gets them to sit at that big boy table.
Zubin, that's the hardware economy, and a great segue into our final provocation. The elephant in the room, or rather the conversation, not the keynote, that is arguably the biggest signal of OpenAI's strategy. I'm talking Sam Altman's sit down with design legend Jony Ive.
Another really significant announcement that happened during Dev Days was AgentKit.
Yeah.
This is the platform that moves AI from just being a conversational-oriented tool to an action-oriented one. AgentKit, along with MCP or Model Context Protocol, which we talked about in an earlier episode, is essentially a framework for building AI agents that can perform complex multi-step tasks. And what was fascinating, and I think her name was Christina Wang, one of the engineering managers, did a live demo touring their static Dev Day website into this AI supercharged experience in under 8 minutes. And this could be a huge threat to the automation platforms like Zapier, N8N, or as we discussed, it could also be this massive market expander.
I was just thinking, Zubin, I felt like Christina Wang executed 8 minutes of terror for N8N. I was wondering actually whether they use 8 sort of like as a message to N8N.
Maybe. Yeah. You might be onto something. Let the conspiracy theories roll.
Welcome back to A to Z FinTech, the podcast where we break down the world of finance, tech, and payments, one letter at a time. I'm Aman, your veteran of Westeros market trenches.
And I'm Zubin, the master of coin, here to count the dragons and the debt. We've got a jam-packed episode today. We're going to dive into the biggest tech news story of the month. A move so audacious, it felt like a dragon landing on King's Landing. OpenAI's Dev Day 2025.
It's been dubbed the mic drop moment of the year, and for good reason. OpenAI isn't just an AI startup anymore. It's positioning itself as a legitimate competitor to the biggest names in tech. We're talking the Mag 7, FANG, you pick your acronym. Sam Altman is not just sitting at the table, he's kicking out the chairs and demanding a new sigil be flown before the Iron Throne.
All right. Before we get into this epic battle of the 7 kingdoms of tech, a quick word of counsel. Whatever we're going to discuss today is purely for entertainment and educational purposes. Aman and I are just two dudes riffing, not financial advisors. If you choose to invest based on any whispers you hear in this castle, remember when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Dramatic. Or in this case, you just lose a lot of money. So don't do that.
Excellent, Zubin. The scale of this ambition is so grand that we can't just talk about segments. It's like a battle plan, Zubin. We've broken this episode into four great provocations, four questions that define the current war for the future of tech. The first is the House of Altman rising. How did a research lab become the newest pretender to the Iron Throne? The second, from chat to chaos and cash. How does Dev Day signal a shift from the conversational toy to a true economic weapon? Third, the gold cloaks on the Iron Bank. Can OpenAI afford this war, given their astronomical cash burn? And finally, the post-smartphone prophecy. Are Sam Altman with Jony Ive building the new form factor that will bring down the Lannisters? I mean, Apple. Let the war council begin.
All right, absolutely. Our first provocation is an examination of OpenAI's audacious move. That shift from a respectable research lab to a full-fledged market disruptor. And this is not just taking on one company. They're essentially opening the battlefronts with Google, Amazon, Meta, and I would argue even Microsoft, their closest ally. It's like challenging the entire small council at once.
It's fascinating, Zubin. You look at their revenue numbers, and while they're growing at mind-blowing pace, the scale is the story. OpenAI made, get this, 1.6 billion in 2023. They doubled that last year in 2024 to 3.7 billion. But listen to this. In the first half of 2025, they reported 4.3 billion. That's 16% more than all of last year in the first half of this year. And they're projected to not just double, but triple their year-on-year revenues to 13 billion for the full year 2025. Those are all numbers with B's on them.
That's just insane. It's almost like the dragons have hatched and they're hungry.
You know, that's massive. Put it on a relative growth terms, and I think this is important. If they deliver on that 10 billion of incremental ARR, that's bigger than Apple's ARR growth last year. Apple. And double of Netflix. And, you know, bet Sam Altman loves this stat. It's 10x Tesla's ARR, our growth, I should say. Yeah. But when we shift gears to total revenues, Zubin, that changes. Sam and OpenAI still look like they have essentially bought a peasant's paring knife to a dragon fight. Even at 13 billion, Meta's 2024 earnings are 12x of that. Google's are 27x of that. Amazon is over 50x of that. And Apple, in case you were wondering, is around 30x. So let me ask you what our listeners are wondering, Zubin. Why do these numbers matter?
Well, Aman, it's a classic David and Goliath story. And Altman wants to do both, right? Like a David that takes on a Goliath, maybe two, maybe three, to make room to become an even bigger new Goliath. And, you know, we talked about revenue, but let's talk about the personality crashes. You know, they're also getting pretty heated. You have Altman, very public disagreement with Musk and his more recent missionaries versus mercenaries jab at Zuckerberg and Meta more broadly. But Altman is essentially calling Meta out for trying to buy their way into this AI race rather than innovating from within. And I think it's a calculated move to reframe OpenAI as the moral, the legitimate leader in the AGI space. It's a true power play right out of the Machiavellian's playbook of the great houses.
Totally, Zubin. And you know, I know we're going with the Game of Thrones theme today, but it reminds me of Gavin Belson's infamous Datageddon speech in the hit TV series Silicon Valley. It's a kind of arrogant, over-the-top pronouncement that only true disruptors can pull off. If we get a chance, we'll roll the tape after this.
92% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years alone. At the current rate, the world's data storage capacity will be overtaken by next spring. It will be nothing short of a catastrophe. Data shortages, data rationing, data black markets. Someone's compression will save the world from Datageddon, and it sure as hell better be Nucleus and not goddamn Pied Piper. I don't know about you people, But I don't want to live in a world where someone else makes the world a better place, better than we do.
Love it, love it, love it. And many a truth is said in jest.
Totally. But it's more than just ego and posturing, Zubin. If Altman wants to stand tall with the poppies, he's going to have to ramp his already massive ambition to unprecedented levels. The products they're releasing directly targeting the core businesses of these companies. The big story of Dev Day was that the suite of announcements that signal a shift from essentially chat to action. Altman seems to be a man in a hurry. For those of you who follow city-states, I like the Singapore story, amazing exponential growth over time. But Altman seems to want to build Dubai. All of that, but more golden, more tomorrow, not next quarter. Come to think of it, actually, Zubin, it feels more like Riyadh these days.
Funny but true. Well, let's break down some of those key announcements. I think first up was the instant checkout in ChatGPT, powered by their new Agentic Commerce Protocol. We know how much we love three-letter acronyms. Going to throw one more in there, ACP, which is an open standard that was co-developed by OpenAI and Stripe. It's essentially enabling merchants, and I think they launched it with Etsy and soon to be with Shopify merchants, to securely share product data and run full checkout flow directly within the ChatGPT interface.
Yeah.
This moves is a direct challenge at Amazon's e-com dominance. Essentially aiming to own that intent to purchase funnel right at the moment a user expresses a need. And Aman, you and I chatted about this as well, right? Like 15% of ChatGPT queries have some sort of commerce intent. And we also read a really interesting stat that ChatGPT already drives about 20% of traffic to sites like Walmart. So this really positions OpenAI as a new toll collector for online payments and effectively building a brand new major channel for global e-commerce.
Absolutely. And then we had the App Store moment, Zubin. But was it that? It reminds me of like that 50s TV line. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? It's Superman. In this case, it would be more like, is it an LLM? Is it an app store? It's a super app. Let me explain. It all goes back to the original premise. OpenAI needs to essentially tap into massively multiplying its already massive revenues. One of these all-time great ideas for the last 20 years is to build a marketplace or an app store. With over 800 million active users, OpenAI has that opportunity. Bring users and developers together, combine that with low-code, no-code capabilities that they're sort of championing, and then you have like a next use case over the existing purveyors of these like Apple App Store and Google Play. So prima facie, that's what the launch of apps in ChatGPT could be. But I'm skeptical. Is this a new open system, or is this like a rope-a-dope strategy to lure developers to aggregate user data and then transition those use cases to their own agents as part of a super app strategy that makes the Chinese giants look pedestrian? Essentially becoming the world's central hub and charging a new kind of rent, as you talked about. The lack of clarity in the revenue sharing model was conspicuously absent, Zubin, which I think is quite telling. Show me the gold, Sam.
I think that is very real concern. But let's shift gears a little and kind of talk a little about this. Another really significant announcement that happened during Dev Days was AgentKit. Yeah. This is the platform that moves AI from just being a conversational-oriented tool to an action-oriented one. AgentKit, along with MCP or Model Context Protocol, which we talked about in an earlier episode, is essentially a framework for building AI agents that can perform complex multi-step tasks. And what was fascinating, and I think her name was Christina Wang, one of the engineering managers, did a live demo during their static Dev Day website into this AI supercharged experience in under 8 minutes. And this could be a huge threat to the automation platforms like Zapier, N8N, or as we discussed, it could also be this massive market expander.
You know, I was just thinking, Zubin, I felt like Christina Wang executed 8 minutes of terror for N8N. You know, I was wondering actually whether they used 8 sort of like as a message to N8N.
Maybe yeah. You might be onto something. Let the conspiracy theories roll. But going back to our theory or our theme of Game of Thrones, Think of AgentKit as the hand of the king. It truly holds the true power to act, and its decrees are carried out through MCPs or model context protocols. And the protocols are essentially the royal map that give the AI agent deep, reasoned understanding of third-party application landscape rather than just simple instructions. So instead of a model being stuck as a message in a chat window, it can now execute complex multi-step tasks across the different,
Incredible.
let's just say, kingdoms or platforms. Again, keeping with our Game of Thrones themes. Aman, but this changes the game for an AI that just offers advice to a true digital employee. The agent can now autonomously follow a command like, find me the best flights, book the cheapest one, and by the way, go ahead and draft that expense report as well, or maybe even just go ahead and submit that. Now, executing all those three different actions across three completely different platforms without needing a human step in between.
You're so right to call that out, Zubin. With those two massive announcements, we almost forgot about the beautiful basics of OpenAI's progress. Model and API upgrades that 2 years ago would have just floored us all with the fabulosity. Like just to recap, they announced ChatGPT 5 Pro and API, the new flagship featuring I think it was a 400,000 token context window. There was GPT Real-Time Mini, a new, smaller, cheaper voice model optimized for low latency streaming. We know they're going gangbusters in places like India. And then there was Sora 2 in API, the advanced video generation model now accessible to developers. It's like an absolute armory of new weapons, Zubin.
It's even hard to keep up, Aman, with just the speed and the velocity of those announcements. But Aman, let's bring this back to the crux of the matter. The ambition is clear. Is OpenAI playing the game to sit at the Mag 7 big boy table? Sam Altman has made it very clear about his ambitions. He wants to verticalize and scale, quote unquote, tech for humanity, I would argue. And you can't deny and you can't deny their revenue growth.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this. They're projected to jump from 3.7 to about 13 billion in 2025, and that's absolutely explosive. But to truly sit at that table, OpenAI's revenue needs to continue at this exponential curve for years.
Yeah. It's not just the revenue, Zubin, it's the sustainability of that over the entire operation. The company is essentially an innovation engine that burns cash at an astronomical rate. They spent $6.7 billion, for more reports, on R&D in just the first half of 2025 and are on track to spend $8.5 billion more for the full year. This is where the money gets weird. We're seeing these massive circular trade deals that Bloomberg just wrote about with chip makers like NVIDIA and AMD. NVIDIA, for example, is reportedly investing $100 billion into OpenAI. Again, B, not M, 100 billion, which OpenAI then immediately uses to buy NVIDIA GPUs.
It's insane. It's almost this closed loop funding model for OpenAI. But it raises these really serious questions about the organic nature of their revenue and whether this is less of a business model or a sustainable business model and more of this incredibly complex vendor finance build out. In fact, as we were prepping, we even read that there was some critiques already labeling this the AI Ponzi scheme, where the value is essentially being created with the flow of money between two interconnected partners. And the need is only escalating. We read this report. Goldman Sachs, for one, estimated that OpenAI needs up to about 114 billion in 2026 just for compute hardware. And that's projecting a potential 62 billion funding shortage. And Aman, to your point up front, the Iron Bank is calling.
I love it. Zubin, I agree. Though it's not without precedent, it should be said. The high-stakes, high-wire act that we're seeing here has been played before in tech. Amazon scaled up its logistics over a decade ago and shocked everybody, including the street. And though arguably what we're seeing today is a factor of even that when you adjust for inflation. So here's the rub. I think it's going to take some maneuvering that would make Machiavelli, your favorite guy, blush. Altman needs to attack two of what are three palaces of profitability, and he is doing that. The first is the attention economy, grabbing users from Google and Meta, maybe even LinkedIn, and definitely X, just for shits and giggles. The second is the ecosystem economy. The series of announcements we talked about just a moment ago goes after just that, the Googles, the Amazons. Here, he needs to thread the needle and be careful not to invoke the wrath of Apple and Microsoft, for now at least. If he grabs material market share of both the ecosystem and attention economy, he will have plenty of riches to capture the imagination of customers, satisfy his growing troops, and quell the inevitable fears of Wall Street.
Brilliant, brilliant. I would even add one more piece to this, right? Like keeping Uncle Satya Nadella on site is going to be key.
Yes.
Microsoft still, I think, controls 70% of the consumer PC market. By some estimates, maybe 90% of the enterprise PC market. And that partnership, the OpenAI Microsoft partnerships, provides this massive pre-existing global distribution channel for all of OpenAI's products. We've already heard of rumors of OpenAI models being integrated into every facet of Windows and Office. That market access could be that one lever that finally gives them the scale they need to overcome those cash burn figures. But Aman, we talked about 3 palaces of profitability. You only shared 2. What's that third one in that trilogy? The one that gets them to sit at that big boy table?
Zubin, that's the hardware economy, and a great segue into our final provocation. Before I attempt to answer that question, let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, or rather the conversation, not the keynote, that is arguably the biggest signal of OpenAI's strategy. I'm talking about Sam Altman's sit down with design legend Jony Ive.
You're absolutely right, Aman. The conversation, I think, was the real mic drop for Dev Days, and even if it was just tucked away. The official news, of course, was the acquisition of Ive's hardware startup IO back in May for a staggering $6.5 billion, complete with that photo that broke the internet. And I think your favorite photo, I think you still might have one hidden with you and Altman, or you and Ives, maybe more you and Ives. I mean, the one that should keep every CEO awake at night, but certainly for one, Tim Cook. And it's what I've said during that chat that really crystallized OpenAI's true deep ambition. And this is where they're really sort of forging their Valyrian steel.
Yeah, exactly. And there were 2 things I took away, Zubin. The first was the tone. I've been a fanboy and follower of Jony Ive Sir Jony Ive, way before the iPhone came out. He does for technology what no one does. He makes it ephemeral. He adds that je ne sais quoi. I know you love the French things. The genius of Steve Jobs is that he appreciated that more than anyone. And that led to that hardware-software juggernaut that they built. Tim Cook appreciated that, no doubt, but never got Jony, in my opinion. They kind of coexisted for 8 years. Jony designing stuff, Tim shipping it like there was no tomorrow, but there was no chemistry. With Sam, I chuckled with the announcement, but the more I see them together, the more I wonder if this is the start of another beautiful relationship. One where roles are reversed, where Ive is the sensei and Sam the enchanted student. And you could see that in their sit down. Now, second is what Ive talked about in his normal or usual abstract way about the imperative to move humanity away from our screen-centric lives. He framed the challenge as designing a new family of devices. And that, Zubin, is the part that got my attention. A family of devices? That's old Apple vernacular. It's how you define the iPhone, the iPad, and the watch all working together.
Yeah, and Aman, it's not just about building a better chatbot. Like, that's not the ambition. They're, like you said, talking about this whole new OS, and without saying a new form factor or potentially form factors, a dedicated ambient family of AI-powered companions, something always on, always listening, and seamlessly integrated. The device that we have been speculating for years. What does that post-smartphone device look like?
So I have a theory around this.
Of course you do. All right. I'm strapped in. Let it rip, Aman.
Okay. So Jony Ive was right, as he was about most things. While Meta and Apple are trying to out-innovate each other and generate the new sort of Google glasses, the one thing they may be overlooking is the fact that the cognitive load on our eyes is reaching max capacity. Call it what you want: screen time, doom scrolling, or just plain digital exhaustion. We are at our wits' end. More screens may not be the answer. A new form factor, as you called it, is due. And we've seen Ive and Jobs before evolve form factors from keyboards that type, the mouses that scroll, to the touch on the iPhone. They've all evolved, and they've invariably involved a GUI screen. I think we're entering a new era of talk, where the primary input moves to verbal, but so does critically the primary receiving mechanisms. That doesn't mean that the screen disappears. The screen could explode to multiple form factors. Anything from your screen on your TV to your phone, which by the way stays as a portable hardware, or the glasses that we just talked about. These are all visual peripherals augmenting a new OS that anchors on voice. That new OS is powered by AI. And the hardware for that is multiple form factors, including the stuff that Ive and crew are, so-called secretly working on. Hardware and software, again, fused seamlessly. That's a nightmare scenario for Apple. Steve Jobs once famously, as you and I will remember, kicked Eric Schmidt off the board when he announced that Google was entering the Android market. Tim Cook should preemptively strike before it's too late with Altman and buy his own LLM. Anthropic would be a natural, but then Google and Amazon are already there. I suspect he needs to go for something, again, French, like Mistral. But, if I was more brave, I would short the Apple stock right now, and potentially Meta. I just don't know the time horizon, Zubin.
Wow, talk about ending this episode with this red wedding mic drop. The old guard is about to be invited to a very hostile dinner party. Aman, I think this is a great place to leave this for today. Thanks for the breakdown.
Always a pleasure, Zubin. And to our listeners, remember, the only thing that matters in the game of tech is compute, cash, and charisma. Altman has all three. Sleep lightly, Seven Kingdoms.